Hey guys, JV here with my final review of Mass Effect Andromeda. I completed 97% of the game on stream, the only exception being a few random task missions. I've had a bit of time to reflect on my experience, so I wanted to sit down and share my overall thoughts on the game. There will be no spoilers in this video, so if you clicked on this hoping to find out whether or not you want to buy the game, you should be able to watch this and make that decision. Also keep in mind, I have a lot to talk about with Andromeda, but I won't cover absolutely everything, so if something seems omitted, it's not because I forgot, it's because it didn't make it into this video, because the game is massive and I prioritize talking about some things over others. This video is split into 7 sections: story, characters, gameplay, art, sound, multiplayer, and technical issues. Before we jump into the story, just a few notes on my experience. I played the game only on Xbox One, so I can't speak to the PC or PS4 versions of the game, and also all of my experience is including the latest patch as of April 17th, which I believe is just patch 1.05. My copy was provided by BioWare. It is a review copy via Mike Dodd and his channel. So link to all of his sites and everything below. I wouldn't have been able to review it or have early content without his help. So I greatly appreciate that. Finally, my playthrough clocked in at around 85 hours. Again, I've done absolutely everything there is to do except for the mining and like 5 or 6 random task missions, some of them working, some of them not. So I've completed the vast majority, again, 97% of the game. I found the overall premise of Andromeda be really compelling and unique. Going to a new galaxy, being an explorer, going to these uncharted worlds that no one, at least no species that you're familiar with, has been to before is just a really compelling idea, and that's felt throughout the game. It's also viewed through the lens of the Ryder family. It's from their perspective, either Scott or Sara, depending on your choice, and then Alec, of course, the father, traveled to Andromeda with them. It's all about an origin story of their family, and they're making history in Andromeda, and it kind of goes from there. So very different from the original trilogy. I'm going to try to not do a bunch of comparisons because I've already done a similar video, but it's different. It has a different kind of flavor to it. It's all about exploring, being an origin story, having untested, unproven characters as your protagonists, and seeing where they go. I felt a sense of progression from the beginning towards the end of the game for Ryder. It really does feel like my Scott Ryder. I should have said I played a male Ryder in my playthrough. I really did feel a progression with him. It feels like he grew up a little bit. He took on responsibility and really succeeded as the human Pathfinder, really the #1 Pathfinder of the entire initiative. You really are the overall leader of the game, similar to Shepard in the original trilogy. The game also addresses the advantages and disadvantages of AI through Sam. It's a theme that they addressed in the original trilogy with the Geth and the Quarians, but in Andromeda, it's a reality. It's an AI integrated with a human being, and of course, there are people that will agree and disagree with that, but I thought it was interesting and compelling how they explored that theme throughout Andromeda, and it's something that kind of develops over the course of the story. As I mentioned, I think the main conflict of the story is completing the mission of the Andromeda Initiative, but in doing that, you run into a lot of obstacles, obviously, that are kind of interwoven into the main conflict. So one of them is defeating the Ket, and I thought that the main conflict, the main arc of the story in Andromeda, defeating the Ket, was good, but I thought that it had pacing issues, and I think it has more to do with the open world aspect of the game than anything, because you can complete a few story missions and then go off for 30 hours and do other stuff. I mean, seriously, there are very long lengths of time where you can complete missions, do all kinds of random stuff that have nothing to do with the main conflict of the Ket, and then return to the Ket, and it feels like, wait, what just happened? You know, where's the sense of urgency? And again, I think that's typical of open world games, but this game does suffer simply from a structural standpoint with the pacing. The ending of the game certainly wraps up the main arc of the Ket threat. That is solved by the end of the game, but there are still many things left open for future sequels. And again, excuse me for comparing to the original Mass Effect, but it does feel the same way there. There are a lot of pieces in place that sets up the mystery of Andromeda, things that need to be solved that are not solved yet. And so I'm looking forward to questions being answered in future games if they do get made. Overall, I think that Andromeda succeeds as an isolated chapter in the Mass Effect universe. In terms of story, I think it works. People have issues with lore inconsistencies, whatever it may be, but nothing, as a fan of the series, nothing really was glaringly out there for me like this doesn't fit, this doesn't feel like Mass Effect. In terms of story, it totally felt like Mass Effect to me. And again, I feel it's a welcome addition to the universe in terms of story. Now we're going to talk about more specific details with the story, starting with choices. And I saw an early criticism of the game from people who possibly couldn't have finished it before launch, saying there's not a lot of choices in the game. I don't find that to be true. I think the volume of choices is about the same compared to any other Mass Effect game, but I do think after playing the game that while there are plenty of choices to be made, they have very little impact or consequence, and as a result, it makes those choices feel unimportant, which is a real shame in a Mass Effect game. I know BioWare's reason for removing Paragon and Renegade was because they felt very Shepard, but making important choices that have impacts on the world at large was not only Shepard, it was Mass Effect, and I think that is a reason why people would say Andromeda doesn't feel as much like Mass Effect because of the choices. You certainly have to make tough choices, but the consequences are not there. You don't feel negative impact of any of the choices that you make, except for one. There's one specific choice, I won't spoil it obviously, but one of them does feel like it makes an impact. The rest really don't feel important at all. In terms of the quality, variety, and structure of missions in Mass Effect Andromeda, I felt that the priority missions, side missions, and loyalty missions were all good. They were all compelling and unique. There was a nice variety of combat and non-combat missions. It didn't feel like every single one you were just shooting countless, bullet spongy enemies. And on the other hand, you had some dialogue missions that were very heavy in talking to a lot of different people and solving issues through non-conflict ways. And so there was a nice variety there. I really did appreciate that. However, the task missions really do fall flat. They feel like busy work, and it seems obligatory these days to include them in big open world games. I don't think that Andromeda necessarily needed all of these random task missions. And, you can say they're optional, you don't have to play them, but they're in the game. And if you're wanting to 100% of the game, then you do have to play them. And so they are optional. You don't have to play these task missions, but they are very dull and boring. Lots of fetch quests that, again, don't seem really necessary. I would have rather seen them do more focused missions instead. If that meant that the game was shorter by 20 hours as a result, I'd much rather be doing, 10 hours of super focused, compelling missions on the side that aren't priority missions instead of 30 hours of these task missions. I think it's fair to argue that some of the task missions are necessary because they have a narrative tie-in through viability and raising that Andromeda viability level to a certain point where you can make the planet sustainable. And this is a point made by Total Biscuit. I always want to mention that because that's where I originally heard this idea. But the narrative tie-in between Andromeda viability points and all the random stuff that you do in the game that seems inconsequential is actually really solid. It's a great way of wrapping together random actions on each planet, and it makes sense. Everything that you do in this game does, generally speaking, work towards increasing the viability and completing the main mission of the initiative. But still, I can't say I really enjoyed a lot of the task missions in this game. They felt like busy work. While we're on story, I wanted to talk about the new races introduced in Andromeda. Starting with the Angara, I found them to be super interesting. Very unique beliefs in the way they interact with the world. The fact that they're super emotional and they don't hide it. They kind of let the world see it. I found that stuff to be really interesting. There's a lot of lore if you really dig deep and want to learn more about the race. Super fascinating to me. I think that the Ket are uninteresting at first and definitely on the surface. They are super uninteresting until you play more through the story and learn more about them. Then I think they do become interesting, but I can see why some people think the Ket are dull. They certainly are dull until you learn more about them. I think that's just a narrative choice. On the surface, there's not much going on, but underneath, there is certainly something to learn about, and I think it is compelling. And then we have the Remnant, who are mysterious, and they remain so throughout the game. You learn a little bit more about them, but they remain mysterious from start to finish, and there's definitely some unanswered questions with them. I think they are interesting, but I wish I learned a little bit more about them in this particular game. Out of the three new races, I found the Angara to be the most interesting. I think it's because you interact with them and learn most about them in this game. It really is an introduction and a deep look at the Angara, which I really appreciated, and I don't know how they could have added more races with the current content load and what was offered in this game. It would have required sacrifices in other areas. The reason I mention that is because that's a common complaint with the game, but I think you have to realize, hey, we're bringing a lot of races from the Milky Way as well. So we have all of these alien species. Yeah, they're not brand new, but this is a new Mass Effect game within this universe. It was either leave all of the species behind and just bring humans and have 5 new alien species or more, 5 to 10 new alien species to deal with, or bring some of our favorites back from the original trilogy and introduce a few new ones. I think it's perfectly reasonable the amount amount of new races that were introduced. To recap my thoughts on the story, I felt like it had some pacing issues due to the structure of the game being open world. It definitely had strong main side and loyalty missions, but very weak task missions that I really wasn't interested in. And then it had some really interesting new alien races that I'd love to learn more about. Overall, I really enjoyed the story of this game. Now let's talk about characters, which deserves its own section because BioWare games always have some interesting, unique characters, and I think Andromeda is no different. Let's start with Ryder. I think he's obviously fundamentally different than Shepard. That's something that shocked a lot of people. A lot of people wanted the same kind of themes and, attitudes of the original trilogy. But the fact is that Ryder, whether it's Scott or Sara, is untested, unproven, has no remarkable history to draw from, no experience that they can rely on to make decisions. They're literally making their history through the game, their significant history. The tonal system with dialogue allows for different responses and makes Ryder who he or she is, but Ryder still has a degree of levity that Shepard did not have. Shepard could be silly in certain situations, especially the Citadel DLC, but Shepard was still Shepard. Well, Ryder is Ryder. It's a new character, and that's a bit of an adjustment, but I definitely fell in love with Ryder. Without spoiling too much, I wasn't a fan of the way BioWare handled the sibling, the Ryder twin that you did not choose. I chose Scott, for example, so Sara in my game, I just feel like the way she was handled was really lazy. It was not my favorite decision. I wish they were more involved, and they really aren't. I hope that changes in future Andromeda games. I found the growth and evolution of Sam, the AI in Ryder's head, to be really compelling. The interactions with Sam, the conversations that you have interacting from human to AI are really interesting, and he grows alongside Ryder regardless of your choices, which is kind of unfortunate. No matter what, he's going to grow and evolve depending on the, after the events of Andromeda. I wish that Sam had a bit more personality. He definitely doesn't come close to EDI. EDI had more games to kind of evolve over, 2 and 3, but I hope that Sam evolves. I think EDI was immediately kind of interesting in Mass Effect 2 more than Sam was, but I hope that Sam evolves over time, from a narrative perspective. I think it would make sense. After playing the loyalty missions for my 6 companions, I felt that all of them showed an evolution, complexity, and level of depth that I appreciated. And let's go down the list of all of them. First off, we have Cora, which is not everyone's favorite companion because of the way she looks, which is a stupid reason, and also her voice, but she is kind of the faithful second in command for Ryder. She has her motivations genuinely challenged, and she has to overcome those. It's a very interesting loyalty mission there. We have Liam, who I would describe as the chaotic good. He's very passionate. He wants to get stuff done, but he takes chances, and he sees the consequences of those and grows as a result. We have Vetra, who I feel like connected with the least, actually. She's kind of the outlaw. She has connections and personal matters that get in the way. I enjoyed her loyalty mission, but overall I felt like I connected least with Vetra. Doesn't mean she's a bad character, but that was probably my least favorite companion. We have Drac, the grizzled Krogan veteran who refuses to let age stop him in destroying whoever's in his way, and there's an absolutely sweet moment with his loyalty mission that made me cry almost on stream. It was just a beautiful moment. I think he's a great character. PB is a fantastic character, this reckless adventurer who's always looking for the next thing that she can do, can discover. She can't stay in one place at once. She is always interesting, and you learn more about her in her loyalty mission. And then we have Jaal. Jaal is my absolute favorite. I love the way he tries to bring out emotion in everyone, and he's just typical Angaran in that way. He wears his emotions on his sleeve, and I just want to hug Jaal for an extended period of time. I think he's very well written. The cadence, the way he talks and makes pauses in his speech, he actually thinks about what he's saying. I love Jaal. I think he's a fantastic character and definitely the most memorable companion in this game for me. Then, of course, you have Suvi, Calo, Gil, and Lexi all bring their own flavors on the Tempest. They're not obviously as fleshed out as the squad mates, but yeah, they're interesting for their own reasons. Squad banter, after it was fixed in patch 1.05, is wonderful. It is amazing. I love it. Seriously, if you haven't played this game and just driven around the Nomad and tried a lot of different squad combinations since patch 1.05, you should, because there's a lot of hilarious and interesting interactions between different combinations of squad mates. For me, the Tempest has a memorable crew if you choose to explore it. If you choose to talk to them at every convenience like you would in the original trilogy, if you choose to do their loyalty missions and rotate them in and listen to the squad banter in the Nomad. There's a lot to learn, and these are some genuinely interesting characters. I found that some characters were good outside of the Tempest. Reyes, Sloan, Addison, Tan, Kesh, the Moshai, they had interesting conflicts that kind of evolved over the course of the game. And then we have the Archon, which is someone I neglected to mention in the story part because I wanted to talk about him here. I didn't find him too compelling, and I think that's because he didn't have enough screen time, or the length between missions for me and how I played through this non-linear game was a little too long. I feel like he popped in every now and then, and I didn't buy into him being the main threat, the main villain of the game as much as I wanted to. For the most part, I found some very memorable characters for the Mass Effect series in Andromeda. Jaal especially. Jaal is my man. I really like Jaal. I think he was fantastically written and super interesting. Shifting gears now over to gameplay. We're going to start with combat. This game has some very fast-paced combat compared to what it used to be, and overall, I really love it. I dig it, and I'm totally in for a faster-paced RPG with Andromeda. I think the jump jet really revolutionizes it. It's the biggest difference in terms of pacing with combat from the original trilogy, and I really like how you're not tied down to a specific class. There's tons of variation through the profiles and the skills, and you're allowed to respec pretty much infinitely as long as you have the credits, and credits usually aren't a problem in the game unless you're on higher difficulties. There's tons of weapons. You've got this robust crafting system where you can go around and collect different elements throughout the game. It's not too much of a pain because there's different ways to collect them. You don't have to go mining, for example. Like, there were some points where I ran out of some elements, but I was very quickly able to find them and craft what I needed. And so I think that is a fun and rewarding system, a little bit unintuitive, but yeah, there's a lot of exciting things going on with the combat, and I think that's why a lot of people do agree that the combat is improved in this game. That being said, the combat in this game does feel like 2 steps forward and 1 step back for a few reasons. The first one is that we only have 3 active skills at a time. I am really not sure why BioWare made that decision. It doesn't make sense to me. We do have favorites that allow us to set presets with our active skills, but we still can only use 3 at a time, and I think that was just a questionable decision. And also, not allowing us to pause the game during combat seemed to make sense with the speed and the pace with the jump jets and all of that. I was kind of on board with that in the beginning, but as I played more of the game, I realized I really do miss being able to pause the game and issue tactical commands with both my character and my squad mates. Stripping the power to control your squad mates via the power wheel, I think, was a mistake. There's something about being able to control your squad mates through that mechanic that made me have a deeper connection through my squad mates. For example, with Shepard and Garrus, the fact that I always had Garrus with me, I told him to put on his sniper and dictated when he should use overload or wherever it may be, made a deeper connection with that character, in my opinion, than otherwise, because it was like me and Garrus, you know? Garrus is this badass. We've gone into battle. I've seen him do these things. In Andromeda, your companions just kind of do whatever. There's really no rhyme or reason to what they do besides you telling them to attack or take cover. And by the way, they're kind of inconsequential unless you tell them to attack a specific target. They're not as effective as they should be either. And so all these things are missed. Having more active skills, power wheel, stopping combat, controlling your squad mates, all these things are missed in the combat part of the game. So I feel that it does definitely step forward, and the amount of freedom that you're allowed to have, I think it's awesome, but I don't know why they cut back on these other things. The other part of gameplay is the exploration aspect, and I found this gameplay loop to be fantastic. I genuinely enjoyed it, and I think that's something you have to consciously make a decision on. If you wanted this game to be super linear like the original trilogy, then you're probably not going to enjoy the exploration game loop. On the other hand, I did, because I bought into it. The Nomad driving, switching between 4- and 6-wheel drive, kind of scaling these cliffs and whatnot, opening to these vast landscapes that you can actually go to. Like, wow, you see that in the distance? I can actually drive over there. Those are awesome feelings. Uncovering undiscovered parts of the world for the first time was sort of a magical feeling because of how beautiful the game is. We're going to talk about art in a second, but yeah, setting down forward stations, dealing with environmental hazards, all of that I enjoyed. I think it's strong in exploration. But of course, only if you're willing to explore. You may not enjoy these parts of the game if you're not willing to experience them. So to recap my feelings on gameplay, I felt that certain parts of combat were improved, others were not improved and actually went backwards, and then I feel it's strong in exploration if you're willing to explore that. I think that overall the gameplay of this game is definitely enjoyable. Let's talk about the art and aesthetic of this game. Outside of human character models, we all know about that. This is a very stunning game visually from what I've seen. We have Frostbite to thank for this, and of course the super talented art team. I picked up the Andromeda art book, which I've gotten through half of so far, but I can already tell how passionate this art team was and how there were a lot of deliberations and design decisions where they were trying to make sure things were familiar to the original trilogy, but also new in their own ways, designing of alien armor and stuff. It's a super intricate process that they went through, and everything else in the game is just beautiful. I mean, if you go through it piece by piece, flying through the Andromeda Galaxy in the Tempest is gorgeous. Even after BioWare added the ability to skip those sequences, I kept watching them because I really did find it to be beautiful to look at these, stardust and all this stuff in these different systems within the Helios cluster. I thought it was awesome. And then of course you move to the actual uncharted planets that you can explore. I found the scope and draw distance of those planets to be incredible. The fact that they were able to maintain a good amount of detail in these open worlds I found to be impressive, even though they were empty, and that is a criticism. Like, of course they're beautiful, they're empty. Well, it makes sense narratively speaking. Why would they be just flourishing as a civilization when you learn about the Angara and the Ket and all of that? It's a game about exploring a new galaxy. Of course it's going to be empty, and that's actually something that I think made it beautiful. It wasn't cluttered or anything like that. These big, open, sweeping landscapes to explore, and the variety was also really nice between Vold, Eladin, Havarl, Eos, and Kadara. Each of them had a different feel and flavor, and they all had something to enjoy. The weapons and armor of this game, there's a pretty good volume, and as you would upgrade each of these pieces, I think at least with the armor, the design would change, and I thought it was all really incredible. There's some awesome armor. It looks so cool that I had people constantly asking me, what is that armor set that you're wearing? Because it was very well designed and really nice to look at. In terms of the new alien species, I really dug the way the Angara looked. Really interesting and unique, not like anything we've seen before. The Ket are a little bit harsh, but narratively speaking, it does make sense when you learn more about them. The Remnant are mysterious, and they were designed to be mysterious. I think they pulled that off. A good majority of the reason this game is nice to look at and fun to play is because of the art and aesthetic. I think they really knocked it out of the park. Shifting over to sound, this game has great music when you hear it. That's the problem. I heard some awesome music in multiplayer, more so than single player, and I've played far more single player than multiplayer. You hear great music in cutscenes and, cinematic scenes that are very scripted and linear, but not so much outside, and that has to be a technical issue because some great music was played for this game. I've downloaded the digital soundtrack. I know there's some great music, it exists, but it's not working. I found the game to have great voice acting, and the problem is we had a banter bug for the first few weeks, so you didn't listen to a lot of your squad mates banter. After the patch, however, it's so much better. You get to listen to all of the interactions, and that's awesome, like I've talked about before. But I think that everyone on the Tempest, the primary people that you deal in the Nexus, have good voice acting. Once you get outside of that, it kind of devolves, and I feel like that's a typical thing with open world games, especially considering that there are 1,200 NPCs you can talk to in this game. Yeah, 1,200. We've already talked a little bit about Sam, how I wish he had more personality, but what's even worse is his interruptions. They really ruin some great experiences with the banter when you're out in the world, constantly being updated about the mining zones and the temperature, things you don't need to know because they're already indicated on your screen. His interruptions really do ruin some of the experiences. I've been listening to some interesting banter, and then all of a sudden Sam cuts it off, and I've gotten really mad, even on stream. I'm like, seriously? Why is this happening? And so that's a big issue. I feel like that needs to get ironed out in a patch if it can be. Finally, I found all of the combat noises to be pretty good. I didn't find any problems with them. The different weapon types, the technology types had different sound effects, all different power noises. The Nomad driving around, listening to the engine, all of that I think had some great sound effect design. So to recap, the sound is great when it works, but oftentimes it doesn't. There are still technical issues with the sound that need to be ironed out with the game. Before we touch on technical and polishing issues, I wanted to talk about multiplayer for a moment. I think that multiplayer is a compelling mode if you're okay with the repetition and grind that it requires from you. It's a 4-player wave-based horde mode where you complete various objectives. There's 7 waves, and each mission lasts like 15 to 20 minutes, depending on the difficulty. There's progression driven by leveling up various characters that are all unique. There's an item progression through packs and microtransactions that allow allow you to get the stuff sooner, but it doesn't create a, competitive advantage because it's not PvP. It's a cooperative mode. So I'm not really concerned with the microtransactions, but it has its own set of balancing issues that the community, the smaller Mass Effect multiplayer community, is definitely vocal about. There's a lot of complaints on the subreddit if you actually go and check it out. I have a few issues with it, and it's mostly not like technical, although there are technical issues there. But once you figure out gold runs, it's the same thing over and over. I think it can be a fun and addictive mode if you enjoy the repetition and grind, but I just don't. And so I don't plan to play a lot more Mass Effect Andromeda multiplayer. Finally, we're talking about technical and polishing issues, and these are as of April 17, 2017, the day I'm recording this, and they may or may not be fixed by the time you watch this video. So please keep that in mind. If I'm complaining about something that has been fixed, then obviously I don't know. I can't see into the future. So first off, human and Asari facial animations lack polish or variety. This is something I touched on in a separate video. It could be some underlying issue affecting the animation that's not allowing it to work, but that is an excuse, and it's unacceptable at launch. At launch, these animations and the way the faces looked were really not up to par for 2017. They even looked worse, as I pointed out, than Inquisition. Things worked better in that game, and it came out in 2014. And it's noticeable enough to take you out of dialogue sequences. And in a game with a lot of dialogue, yeah, that is a really big problem. For me, it didn't ruin the overall experience. Like I said, I've genuinely enjoyed the game despite these issues, but it's just not polished. And depending on your stance and how much you love Mass Effect or anything like that, people are saying they're not going to buy the game because of this issue. I think that is definitely a subjective thing and a personal issue. If you don't want to buy a game because the dialogue doesn't look great on these specific characters, that's totally your call. Other issues I've found are floating and unresponsive enemies in certain areas, particularly on Kadara. I don't know why that was the case, but they're floating like 30 feet up in the air. Clearly a glitch, didn't make any sense. There's a handful of tasks that are broken and prevent 100% in my game. I know it's not in everyone's game, but in my game, I went to a specific area of the game I wasn't supposed to go to, but of course I didn't know I wasn't supposed to go there because I didn't have the quest yet. Because I visited that place first, then it broke the quest. So I can't technically get 100%, and that's pretty frustrating for me. There are clipping issues with objects that characters are holding in secondary dialogue situations. So for example, if a character is holding a cigar or a data pad, that's going to be like floating out of their hands instead of in their hands. That's kind of distracting, detracts you from the dialogue. And then I've had two specific important story scenes where a character has been invisible, a ghost character. I haven't either heard their lines or seen them in that cutscene. And I'm just like, what the hell is happening? I had to reload in order to actually see the scene play out normally. That's a serious thing, and that shouldn't be happening the first time I watch these scenes. It kind of ruins it for me. Other problems I still run into are frame drops on Kadara and the Tempest. For some reason, the ship has low frames in certain spots and kind of works itself out after 30 seconds, but it's kind of irritating every time it happens. And when you hit level 61 and you go through level 61 to 70, items just disappear from vendors completely. That is just what the hell is happening. It's a big bug, and I hope they fix it immediately. And then I've talked about this before. The UI and the quest sorting in the game is unintuitive by nature. I don't think this is a glitch, but it is a problem. I'm not sure if it can be fixed, but it's really kind of frustrating navigating through some of the menus because they weren't built to be, intuitive. They were built to be aesthetically pleasing, which is not really a good thing. And then finally, the SAM spam. I've talked about that, interrupting banter. I consider that a bug. I don't think they wanted that stuff to interrupt the banter. It's just not cool. So I hope they, fix that. To wrap up my review, I wanted to share some closing thoughts. I believe that Andromeda is a good game made by passionate people. As someone who is a big fan of the original trilogy and streamed the whole thing before Andromeda came out, I find that Andromeda is a welcome addition into the Mass Effect franchise. I think it has its own place, it has its own unique flavor, just like the original 3 games had in their own different ways. There are certainly areas where I do like the changes and others where I don't, like I've explained in this video. Regardless, this was a memorable experience in the Mass Effect series for me. It may not have been the best Mass Effect game, and I certainly don't think it does. I don't think it eclipses any of the original games, but I did enjoy myself. Obviously, technical and polish issues hold this game back, and the perception, I think, affects everyone in this connected world that we live in. If you hear that Mass Effect is a bad game, whether you are going to play it or not, you're going to have that perception in your head without formulating your own opinion on it, because you're not going to buy a game if you hear that it's bad, right? You're just not going to do it. And even after playing at my own pace on stream and experiencing it for myself, I still feel that the perception has influenced my opinion to a certain degree. As always, if you have any thoughts, be sure to share them in the comment section below. If you enjoyed this video, remember to hit that like button. I'd really appreciate it, and I will talk to you next time.